New Orleans, 1918. A city of music, mystery, and shadows. Jazz poured from dimly lit clubs, laughter echoed through the streets, and the humid night air carried the scent of gumbo and whiskey. But beneath the rhythm and color, something darker stirred. The city was about to meet a monster. Not a beast from folklore, not a ghost from the swamps, but a man of flesh and blood. A man who would come to be known only by the name the newspapers gave him, the Axeman of New Orleans. It began quietly, almost like a whisper. On May 23, 1918, the home of Joseph and Catherine Maggio was found drenched in blood. The couple, respected grocers, had been slaughtered in their own bed. Their throats were cut, nearly to the point of decapitation, and their skulls smashed with an axe. The murder weapon, a bloody axe, was left behind, discarded in haste. The city reeled. This wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Money and valuables were untouched. The killer had slipped in, killed with inhuman brutality, and vanished into the night without leaving a trace. The newspapers went wild. Panic began to spread. If a quiet, hard-working couple could be butchered in their own home, who was safe? The answer was chilling. No one. The police scrambled. They arrested suspects, questioned neighbors, searched for motives. But the more they dug, the stranger it became. Nothing made sense. No clear motive, no clear suspect, and no way to predict who might be next. The only certainty was the weapon, an axe, sometimes stolen from the very homes he attacked. Soon, another attack followed. In June, Louis Bissumer and his mistress, Harriet Lowe, were struck while sleeping. Both survived, but barely. Their skulls fractured, blood pooling on the sheets. As Harriet lay dying weeks later, she accused Bissumer of being a German spy, a strange twist that only fueled rumors and hysteria. The city's paranoia deepened. The Axeman was not just killing people, he was unraveling the very fabric of New Orleans. Every locked door felt unsafe. Every creak in the night carried terror. Families began sleeping with weapons at their bedside. Men took turns keeping watch. And still, the Axeman kept striking. By late summer, New Orleans was a city on edge. Churches filled with fearful prayers, and the sound of jazz, usually joyful, seemed to carry an uneasy tone, as though even music itself trembled. The murders weren't just crimes. They were performances, and the killer was orchestrating a symphony of fear that would haunt the city for years to come. By the fall of 1918, the people of New Orleans no longer slept soundly. They locked their doors, nailed their windows, and whispered prayers before blowing out their lamps. But the Axeman wasn't deterred by locks, nor was he bound by fear. He thrived on it. On August 5th, the screams of Anna Schneider pierced the night. 8 months pregnant, she had been attacked while lying in bed. Her scalp was torn, her face smashed by repeated blows. She survived the attack, and her child lived too. But the terror grew. Who could strike down a mother and unborn child without hesitation? The newspapers declared it a fiend's work. The police were overwhelmed. Every attack seemed to defy reason. There was no pattern to the victims. Men, women, young, old, Italian immigrants, American-born citizens, all shared only one detail. Their homes had been invaded, and the weapon was almost always an axe. Sometimes, the killer used the very tool of the household he destroyed. And then there was the strangest clue of all. In nearly every attack, the doors of the homes showed signs of being chiseled open, as though the intruder had carefully carved his way inside while the family slept. A silent craftsman of death. The public began to whisper, was the Axeman targeting Italian grocers specifically? Many of his victims were from immigrant families who ran small shops. But when non-Italians were attacked, that theory collapsed. Was it revenge? Was it robbery? No, money and valuables were almost always untouched. The mystery thickened, and with it, the city's paranoia. Shopkeepers began carrying guns. Fathers took shifts patrolling their porches. Mothers tucked their children into beds surrounded by crucifixes, hoping faith alone might ward off the Axeman's blade. Then came March 1919, when the Axeman revealed something the city had not expected: a letter. It was addressed to the city of New Orleans itself, published in the Times-Picayune. The words dripped with arrogance, menace, and something almost theatrical. The writer claimed to be not just a killer but a demon from hell itself. He mocked the police for failing to catch him. He promised more blood, more terror. And then came the most bizarre part of his message. He declared that on the night of March 19th, he would once again walk the streets of New Orleans. Anyone whose home did not echo with the sound of jazz would meet his axe. It was a challenge, a taunt, and a spectacle unlike anything the city had ever seen. On that night, March 19th, New Orleans became a city of music. Every bar, every club, every home that could manage it filled the air with jazz. Bands played into the early hours. Families crowded around gramophones. Neighbors huddled together, horns blaring, drums pounding. City had become a stage, and the Axeman was its director. No murders were reported that night. For one strange evening, the killer's threat had turned fear into a festival of survival. But no one felt relief. The people knew the Axeman wasn't gone. He was only waiting, watching, sharpening his blade for the next act of his bloody performance. The night of jazz had brought New Orleans only a brief reprieve. The city had danced in defiance, laughed nervously under the glow of lanterns, and clung to the idea that music could keep the devil at bay. But when the music stopped, silence returned, and silence was when the Axeman thrived. On August 10th, 1919, the Axeman struck again. This time, his victims were the elderly Schneider family. The brutality was the same, the entry the same, chiseling through doors, slipping inside like a phantom. The walls of their home were painted with blood. Neighbors whispered that the devil had been true to his word. He had come back, not for those who played jazz, but for those who had simply let down their guard. The police had no answers. Detectives chased every theory. Was it a gang vendetta? Was it a lone madman? They dragged suspects in and out of jail, but none of the arrests ever stuck. In one case, they accused a man named Joseph Momfrey, a petty criminal tied loosely to the Italian underworld. But without evidence, the charges collapsed. The papers mocked the police, calling them incompetent, while the city watched in terror as the body count rose. The killer's appetite grew bolder. In October, he attacked the Pepitone family. Mrs. Pepitone was found with her skull smashed, barely clinging to life. Her husband returned home to find the nightmare waiting. She would live, but her mind and body would never fully recover. The Pepitone case became a symbol of just how merciless this shadow had become. People began to see him everywhere. Every creak of a floorboard, every knock at the window, every shadow on the wall was him. The Axeman had become more than a murderer. He was a legend in the making, a monster who could slip through locked doors and vanish into the night. The newspapers stoked the fear, printing every gory detail, describing the shattered skulls, the broken furniture, the way families were cut down in their beds. And yet, not once did the police arrive in time. Not once did they catch him in the act. By late 1919, the city had reached its breaking point. Vigilante groups began to patrol the streets. Grocers stood behind their counters with shotguns. Mothers refused to let their children sleep alone. And through it all, the Axeman continued his silent rampage, untouchable, unpredictable, unstoppable. The killings no longer felt random. They felt like a performance. Each new victim added to the mythology of a figure who seemed less like a man, and more like an unstoppable force of chaos. And then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the Axeman began to fade. His last known attack came in October 1919. A family was brutalized, their home shattered, but this time the victims lived to tell the tale. And then, nothing. No more broken doors, no more screaming neighbors, no more bodies pulled from blood-soaked sheets. The Axeman had vanished, leaving only questions behind. When the murders stopped, New Orleans was left with nothing but theories. The city had been terrorized for over a year, and yet no one had seen the Axeman clearly. No fingerprints, no footprints, no real evidence beyond the broken doors and bloodied axes, but that didn't stop people from trying to unmask him. The most common theory was that the Axeman was connected to the Italian mafia. Many of the victims had been grocers, Italian immigrants, who ran small neighborhood shops. Some believed the attacks were part of a protection racket gone wrong, punishments for those who didn't pay their dues. The Axeman, in this telling, wasn't a lone madman at all. He was a hired killer, a tool of organized crime. Others claimed he was Joseph Momfrey, a low-level gangster with a reputation for violence. Years later, one widow of an Axeman victim swore she had tracked down Momfrey in Los Angeles and shot him dead in revenge. The story became legend, though historians doubt its accuracy. Still, the name Momfrey lingers in the Axeman's mythology, a shadowy figure who could have been the man behind the mask. Then there was the theory of insanity. Some believed the Axeman was simply a deranged man who slipped in and out of sanity, killing when the madness overtook him. His choice of weapon, an axe taken from the victim's own homes, suggested someone who killed impulsively, not methodically. But if that was true, how had he vanished without a trace? Men like that didn't just stop, they escalated until they were caught or killed. And yet the most famous theory was the strangest one of all, that the Axeman was not a man but a demon. The jazz letter had planted the idea in people's minds, and it grew like wildfire. The devil loved jazz, the devil had demanded music, and for one night, the devil had spared an entire city. To the people of New Orleans steeped in folklore, voodoo and superstition, the idea didn't seem impossible. Stories spread of people who had glimpsed him, a tall shadowy figure slipping down an alley, a man with burning eyes standing in a doorway. Others whispered that he was a spirit that could never be caught, a being that fed on fear. The police, of course, had nothing. After countless arrests, interrogations and failed prosecutions, they quietly let the case fade away. It was easier to let the city invent its own explanations than to admit they had been powerless from the start. But the people of New Orleans never forgot. The Axeman had carved himself into the city's identity, just like its music and its myths. He was part of the tapestry now, an unsolved terror, a ghost story that would outlive the men who had actually lived through it. And as the years passed, the legend only grew. After March 1919, the Axeman of New Orleans disappeared as suddenly as he had arrived. There were no more notes, no more smashed doors, no more bodies left bleeding in their beds. The city breathed again, but it wasn't relief. It was unease, because the silence wasn't justice, it was mystery. Some said he had died, others claimed he had left New Orleans for another city, perhaps to terrorize elsewhere, but no police department ever announced a similar string of murders. If he was still alive, he had either stopped killing, or found a way to hide better. Both possibilities were terrifying. The absence of closure meant the Axeman became more than a man. He became a story. Families whispered about him to children. Jazz musicians joked that the devil himself had strolled through their streets, hungry for music. Writers picked up the tale, turning it into folklore. Decades later, his legend was immortalized in books, documentaries, even television. One of the most haunting portrayals came in the series American Horror Story, where the Axeman was reimagined as a jazz-obsessed killer ghost. The show's exaggeration wasn't far from what many in New Orleans already believed, that he was something beyond human. The truth, though, remains hidden. Was he a mafia enforcer named Momfrey? Was he a butcher, a carpenter, a drifter who blended into the chaos of the city? Or was he just madness given flesh, a shadow that slipped in and out of the night? What we do know is this: in 1918 and 1919, an entire city danced with death. The sound of jazz filled every bar and parlor, not just for joy, but for survival. The people of New Orleans kept their homes lit, their doors locked, their records spinning, because a faceless killer demanded it. And then, just as quickly as he had come, he was gone. That's the most chilling part of all. Not the blood, not the fear, not even the letter promising murder. It's the silence afterward, because silence doesn't answer questions, it leaves them open, echoing, unsolved. The Axeman of New Orleans is still out there, not in flesh, but in legend. He's in every jazz note that drifts through the French Quarter, every shadow in a cracked doorway, every whisper of the devil walks tonight. And maybe that's what he wanted all along, not just to kill, not just to terrify, but to live forever as the nightmare no one could explain.